Thank you very much, Prime Minister, dear Mette, Colonel, dear cadets, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here with you today. This is no more, there is no more an inspirational group to speak to than to women and men who have chosen to devote their careers and their lives for the security and the freedom of others. Your mental and your physical fortitude, your sense of duty and honor are testament to yourselves, your families, and to your nation as a whole. And this historic academy is one of the reasons I chose Denmark to speak about security and to make the case that if Europe wants to avoid war, Europe must get ready for war. And Denmark is acutely aware of its own security and threats, not least because of its unique strategic geography, but also because of recent events. I'm, of course, talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine and conflicts in other theaters, but also the repeated and continued attacks on critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. And of course, the ongoing competition for influence in the Arctic region, including Greenland. And to all the people of Greenland and of Denmark as a whole, I want to be very clear that Europe will always stand for sovereignty and territorial integrity. And it is against this complex backdrop that I salute the Prime Minister's decision to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP in the next 2 years. This, dear Mette, is true leadership. Dear cadets, if we look back over each generation of cadets who have graduated from this institution, they have faced their own challenges. For those in the post-war years, it was about fighting their way in that dangerous time. And it is exactly on this day in March 1948 that Denmark stationed naval assets on your islands of, I hope I pronounce them well, Anholt, Læsø and Samsø. And it was done because of very real fears of an imminent attack from the east. These events ultimately led to Denmark's historic decision to join NATO the following year. And being part of NATO meant that for generations that followed, their duty was also about protecting peace across the world and help secure our own freedoms. But somewhere along the line, the era of the peace dividend gradually set in. The idea took hold that spending on defense should be ramped up during conflict times, but should just as quickly be driven down in times of relative peace. And with the help of NATO and the transatlantic alliance, these times of relative peace seemed to be a permanent state. The truth is, we quickly convinced each other that this truly exceptional period that saw the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall come down and entire nations and people set free was a norm. And this led to underinvestment in defense and, frankly, to overcomplacency. Our adversaries used that time not only to remobilize, but also to challenge the rules that govern global security. And that brings us to today. The era of the peace dividend is long gone. The security architecture that we relied on can no longer be taken for granted. the age of spheres of influence and power competition is well and truly back. Just take Russia. We already know its determination to deny other countries their right to choose their own path. And now Russia is on an irreversible path to creating a pure war economy. It has massively expanded its military-industrial production capacity. 40% of the federal budget is spent on defense, 9% of its GDP. And this investment fuels its war of aggression in Ukraine while preparing it for future confrontation with European democracies. And just as these threats increase, we see our oldest partner, the United States, move their focus to the Indo-Pacific. Dear cadets, we may wish these things were not true, or that we did not have to say them so bluntly. But now is the time to speak honestly, so that every European understands what is at stake. Because the discomfort of hearing these words pales into insignificance with the pain of war. Just ask the soldiers and the people of Ukraine. The point is that we must see the world as it is, and we must act immediately to face up to it. Because a new international order will be formed in the second half of this decade and beyond. So as we stand here today, Europe faces a fundamental choice about its future. Do we keep reacting to each challenge in an incremental and cautious way? Or are we ready to grasp this opportunity to build a more secure Europe, one that is prosperous, free, and ready, willing and able to defend itself? Dear cadets, the answer is clear. The choice is none. Europe is ready to step up. We are ready to take control of the change that is inevitable. Because we cannot afford to be pushed around by history. And that means acting now is a must. Acting big is a conditio sine qua non for speed, scale and strength by 2030. This is what Denmark is doing. This is what others are doing. This is what Germany is deciding on today. And these decisions are both historic and necessary. By 2030, Europe must have a strong European defense posture. Readiness 2030 means to have rearmed and developed the capabilities to have credible deterrence. Readiness 2030 means to have a defense industrial base that is a strategic advantage. But to be 2030 ready, we must move now. And that is where the European Union comes in. To be very clear, Member States will always retain responsibility for their own troops, from doctrine to deployment, and of course for the definition of the requirements of their armed forces. But there is a lot that is needed at European level. And indeed, tomorrow we will present a roadmap for Readiness 2030. And I would like to briefly touch on 4 key priorities. The first and overarching priority is a surge in defense spending. We all know there was an underinvestment in defense for too long. Member States' defense spending has now increased by more than 31% since 2021. That is better, but that is not enough. It is still far lower than that of the United States, Russia and China. So rebuilding European defense will require massive investment over a sustained period, both public and private. And this is why the Commission put forward a plan to unleash 800 billion euros of investment in European defense. This includes our new instrument, we call it SAFE, that can very quickly unlock 150 billion euros for member states. And this will help us to buy better, to buy faster, and to buy more European. It will facilitate joint procurement. A very good example is the Danish lead nation example model. It delivers very fast, it delivers very reliably, and investment should go into priority capability domains for which action is necessary at European level, of course in alignment with NATO. But we also need to support member states to increase their own defense budgets. And this is why we're proposing to activate what we call the National Escape Clause, because this will give countries much more flexibility to spend more on defense without falling foul of fiscal rules. This holds the potential to mobilize additional defense expenditures of up to 1.5% of GDP, or some 650 billion euros over the next 4 years. And we're working to draw in also private financing, whether from the European Investment Bank or the capital markets. To my second point, what we invest in and how we invest is just as important as how much we spend. We must close our capability gaps. They are evident, we have them, and we must do this the European way. That means large-scale pan-European cooperation to address gaps in priority areas. That starts with fundamentals like infrastructure and military mobility. By 2030, we need a functioning EU-wide network of land corridors, airports and seaports to facilitate the fast transport of troops and military equipment. At the same time, we need to invest in air and missile defense, artillery systems, ammunition and missiles, and we have to learn the lessons from the battlefield and the changing nature of modern warfare. We have seen the importance of drones and counter-drone systems in Ukraine. And Europe needs to develop all types of unmanned systems and the advanced software and sensors behind them. And the same goes for cyber and using military artificial intelligence or quantum computing. Now the scale, the costs and the complexity of projects in these areas go far beyond any single member state's capacity. But together, as Europeans, we can master this challenge. And this is why we must develop large-scale projects and step up collaborative procurement in these areas. That means pooling demand, shorten lead times, and of course ensure interoperability. Ladies and gentlemen, the third priority for European defence is perhaps the most strategic, and that is increasing support for Ukraine. This is what we call the steel porcupine strategy, because we need to make Ukraine strong enough to be absolutely indigestible for any potential invader. So we need to invest in Ukraine's strength, in deterrence through denial. We have done a lot already. We have supported Ukraine with about 50 billion euros in military support alone, and trained more than 73,000 Ukrainian troops. And our support for Ukraine's accession to the European Union remains as strong as ever, but there is a lot more that we can do. And to help make this a reality, we will set up a joint task force with Ukraine to coordinate the European Union's and the Member States' military support to Ukraine. But Ukraine can support us too. In fact, as you said, Mette, there's a lot that we can learn from the transformation of Ukraine's defense industry. The innovation, the speed, the scale of its industrial base is amazing. It's remarkable. It is a huge asset for Ukraine, but it is also a blueprint for Europe. So we need to speed up Ukraine's integration in the European defense equipment market, and our industry is learning from Ukraine's defense industry. Ukraine's industry has the daily battlefield experience, how to innovate just in time, how to produce faster, how to produce more cheap, and of course, how to produce more intelligent. And this brings me to my fourth priority: strengthening Europe's defense industrial base. We have many competitive and world-leading defense companies. And we have many SMEs that are developing new technologies at cutting edge of innovation. But our industrial base still has structural weaknesses. It is not able to produce defense systems and equipment in the quantities and the speed that member states need. It remains too fragmented, with dominant national players catering to domestic markets. So we really need to turn the tide. And it starts with investment in Europe. As we all know, today the majority of defense investment goes outside Europe. In other words, that means good jobs outside Europe, return on investment outside Europe, research, development and innovation outside Europe. So this is not sustainable. We must buy more European, because that means strengthening the European defense technological and industrial base. That means stimulating innovation here in Europe. That means creating an EU-wide market for defense equipment. In addition, companies need a steady stream of multi-year orders to steer investment and ramp up capacity. So pooling our demand and joint procurement is therefore even more important. We will set up a European military sales mechanism to help make this happen. Member states need to be able to fully rely on European defense supply chains, especially in times of urgent need. And a European market would deliver that. It will be a driver for our prosperity and an industrial competitiveness as much as for our security. It will unleash innovation, research and skills. So we will put forward also a defense omnibus to simplify rules, to simplify regulations. You all know that, from certification to permitting to joining existing contracts. All this is complicated and difficult today. This has to go. And we will convene a strategic dialogue with the defense industry to look at all the obstacles they face to get rid of these obstacles. Dear cadets, I know that my message to you today is stark. I paint a picture of a world fraught with danger. But we are stronger than we think. And we are not in this alone. Europe is more united than ever. It is more determined than ever. And it has partners, friends and allies that it can work with and count on. Security challenges often have global implications. What happens elsewhere can quickly happen over here. And of course, vice versa. And most of the threats we face are cross-border. Whether it is a Russia determined to regroup, or hybrid, or cyber attacks, or threats in space, or at sea. So that is why we're fully committed to working with NATO and the United States. Our security is indivisible. And that is why we are working to break new ground on security with the United Kingdom and other partners within Europe, in our neighborhood, and within the G7, from Canada to Norway, and even as far afield as India and other parts of Asia. Like all young cadets in all those countries, your lives and your careers will be devoted to building and securing peace, freedom, and prosperity. But I would like you to remember that freedom is not a slow process. It is a constant struggle. And I'm not sure whether I have the right English word. But there's a word in Ukrainian. The word is volya. Volya means freedom. But it also means courage and will to fight for freedom. And that is every generation's duty. That is what we together are working for. Because Europe is more than a union. It is our home. Thank you very much, and long live Europe.